Hello there, beautiful teachers. Welcome to your weekly show on YouTube. My name's Nicola Canton, and I am the creator of Vibrant Music Teaching, as well as the blogger behind Colourful Keys. And on this show on YouTube, we go through different tips and ideas for teaching music in a way that is creative and interactive and fun. And we also go through the latest news, and we have a fun, different feature each week. So today on the show, we're talking about talking to parents about games and using games in lessons. And we're also going to be going through chapters 3 and 4 of our book at the moment that we're working through together, which is Make It Stick by Peter C. Brown. Now, several people have mentioned the cost of the book, so I do want to recommend that it is available in Kindle format, ebook format, and also in Audible. So if you are an Audible subscriber like me, if you listen to a lot of audiobooks, that might be an option, as well as trying your library's app, both for the audiobook and for the ebook version. It's often available. It is on the Irish one anyway, so it's often available those types of places as well as in person in your library. Because I know the paper shortage has made it difficult to get prints of it. So if you're a print person, I understand, but there are other options out there. Now, our main topic of today is all about talking to parents about games. So I want to hear from you in the chat or in the comments about a time when a parent has pushed back on you or against anything that you're doing in your studio. It doesn't have to be games. Was there a time when a parent questioned why you were doing something the way you were, suggested doing it another way, or insisted on something that wasn't part of your initial plan? I know as a young teacher, a lot of these things, I felt like they were not recommendations even, but were just the parent insisting on something, and I couldn't really push back against that because I felt like I didn't have the confidence to do that, basically, and the parents were that much older than me. I mean, I was 16, and what did I know except I did know better. I mean, really underneath it all, I did. So I would love to hear from you if you've had an experience like that. The particular idea we're talking about today is games. And I know I've heard this from several members. Now, I will admit to you, I don't really have this problem in my studio, and I will talk to you about why that is, but that's in the last section. What I want to start with is a few bullet pointed reasons why games are fantastic. Not because I think you need convincing, because that's a whole other story, but because sometimes it's hard for us as teachers to articulate why we're doing things the way that we are, right? And if you have a few notes, a few fallback options of this is why I do things the way that I do for any aspect of your teaching, that's going to be really helpful. So what are your reasons for using games? My main ones are about, first of all, movement. I believe that more movement leads to better concentration for kids and adults. And games provide one more option for that. Now, they're not the only way to get kids off the bench, and they're not the only part of the lesson where kids do get off the bench or get moving or just sit in different positions. But they are another way to do that. And we know that moving helps us re-engage our brains, and that the younger we are, the more often we need to do that. Number 2 is that more fun leads to more learning. Doesn't it? Haven't you witnessed this yourself in your studio or in your own life? I know for me, if I'm having fun, I'm going to remember that better. And I think that's true for most humans of any age. If we are engaged, if we're attentive, if we're having fun and staying in the moment, that can be a really useful thing to help us engage with the learning and retain it better. I've been listening to a podcast recently, which is The Happiness Lab. Does anyone else listen to that one? It's by Dr. Laurie Santos, I believe is her name. And the last 2 episodes have actually been about fun. So I want to recommend that to you because it's about, she calls it the fun intervention. It's an intervention with herself about having more fun. And she's looking at different ways to bring more fun into her life. More lightheartedness, yes, but really they're defining fun as that flow state, that in the moment state when you're really enjoying something, but you're present for it. And kids are more present for different varied activities than they are when things kind of stagnate or when we repeat things too much or do things in just one way. Which brings me to my next point about games, which is that different perspectives lead us to better retention. Many parents might think, and many teachers might think, that we would be better off doing music and just sitting at the piano and playing music in order to get better at playing music, right? That it seems more focused, it seems more concentrated, it seems more about the thing we're doing. But if we take that learning into different contexts, that's when we can retain it, and that's when it becomes more flexible. Have you ever witnessed that in your teaching? It means that students can use that learning in different ways because they have learned it in different ways. If you can only do something in one context, do you really understand it? Do you really know it? Does that count? And are you going to be able to apply that when things look different? When the piece is in a different key? When the time signature changes? Any number of different contexts. Taking things out off the piano and into a game provides different perspectives that can make that learning more durable as well as more flexible, which is really what we want. Let me know your thoughts about what the key points are of why you include games in lessons. Now, if you've given these reasons to parents, you've had the conversation, even though that conversation can be tough, but you're still having trouble with this, it might be a case that the family or the parents need to feel it and see it firsthand in order to believe it. So this is when two things can be really helpful. Number one is to get families involved in the lessons. So actually bring them in. Bring in the sibling, bring in the mum and the dad, and get them to actually play the game with you in the lesson. They'll get to see how much they learn through that process and how much their child is learning every step of the way. How much they're figuring things out for themselves rather than you spoon feeding it, which you might have to do if they had so many other things going on sitting at the piano, right? So getting families involved is one great way. And the second tip is really adjacent to that, which is to assign games for homework. When you assign games for homework, families get involved at home because they're part of that as well. So they get to, again, witness it firsthand, and even more so than in the studio with you, where they have you as a fallback, they're going to get to really interact with their kid about this, really engage with their learning and learn themselves again, so that they get to understand what that process is like. Linda said, I teach online, so I haven't thought about movement, but I agree and use your other reasons. I'll have to ponder that as movement, but they do sit differently. Yeah, so bringing some movement into your games online is definitely super important, as well as bringing movement into other things you're doing online. Don't let yourself believe that you have to see them at that perfect angle the whole time online. Let them get up, let them move about. Even if it means they go a little bit off camera, you need to have enough trust there, and they will appreciate that you do. Too often teachers, and this is broadly speaking teachers, I feel, try to control the situation in a way that they would be able to in person, or that they feel they would be able to in person. And that can lead to this feeling of mistrust, I think, because the college lecturer insists that all of them have their cameras on Zoom. And that sends the message that they don't believe that you're going to pay attention or even participate at all if you don't have your camera on. Maybe that's true in a big college lecture, but in a one-on-one relationship, we can trust our students enough to have them get up, even if they're off the piano bench, and just tell us what they're doing if they need to relay that information back to us, right? So Linda, definitely think about incorporating movement. That's a great thought for today and a great thing to take away from this session. The last thing I want to say about the whole question of games or anything else that you want to do in your teaching is that you're the expert. You actually are. And you need to believe that even if you are that young new teacher, you know more than the parents about this. You have invested time into learning about not just music, but also teaching. And you know what you're talking about. But maybe you don't always articulate it the way you want to, but you do know why you're doing these things. And you do know more than that parent. They know their child best, but you know music lessons best, right? You know teaching and music better than them, probably, unless they're a music teacher. And so you need to live in that. You need to believe that you are the expert in this, that you are the teacher, and not what you say goes. You can have the conversation, but ultimately it is your decision how that lesson proceeds, how you plan things, everything like that. So if you're having trouble believing this, one of three things might be going on. Number one is that your games just aren't effective. So if you're not using pedagogically sound games, if you don't know the purpose behind them, if they are just a brain break, need to practice saying that today. If they are just a brain break, then maybe you need to rethink your game choice. But if they are effective, then you can feel confident in yourself. Number two is that you don't believe in games-based learning. You're doing it because you kind of think maybe it would be a good idea, but you're a bit wishy-washy on it yourself. You're not quite sure that it's a good idea, that it's going to be effective, that you believe it's proven. And so that's where you need to go and do some reading about this. Convince yourself first before you can convince anyone else that this is a good strategy for your studio. And then number three, if you still are getting pushback from parents, you've given them the reasons, you are confident about your games, and you are using games that are pedagogically sound and make a lot of sense to you in your teaching, in your community, then maybe you're not attracting the right families. So I promised I would come back at the end to why I don't have this problem in my studio. And it's not because I give parents these reasons. And it's not because I use fantastic games. And it's not because I give games homework, even though I do all of these things. It is because my website showcases a studio filled with games. And when I talk to parents before they sign up, I'm also talking about games and creativity and doing things differently. And if they want a standard traditional studio, they are not signing up for lessons for me. And that's what I want. I don't want them there. Because you're only ever going to get pushback from families who signed up for something that you don't provide. I'm not saying what they want is wrong. I'm saying I'm not that. And if they want to sign up for that, I'm not going to pretend to be it just to get them in the door, because we're playing a retention game. We need to keep people in our studio for a really long time. And they're not going to stay there if you're not a good fit. Or you're going to be bending into pretzel shapes to try and become that fit for them. And you're going to be doing that in all different custom ways for all different types of families. I'm not saying we don't adapt to different students. We definitely do that. We want to do that. But we need to consider who we are and the kind of teacher we are and the kind of students we want to teach. So if you're constantly getting pushback from parents about something you do, maybe you're attracting the wrong families, or maybe your teaching perspective, your teaching philosophies are off for what the community needs if you can't attract any of the families that want what you provide. That's a few different things to think about. We started with our reasons about why we do games, the things we can talk to parents about. So the fact that more movement leads to better concentration, more fun leads to more learning, and different perspectives lead to better retention and more durable and flexible learning. Then we talked about getting families involved in lessons. So having them come into the lessons and play the games with their kiddo, and also sending those games home as homework so that they can play them at home. And then we talked about living in your expertise, that you believe that games are effective, that you believe that the games you choose are effective and pedagogically sound, And then that you are attracting families that appreciate your type of expertise, your type of teaching, your teaching philosophies, what you want to provide. So I hope that gives you a few different tips for improving this conversation, having a more beneficial conversation with parents about using games in lessons, convincing them how wonderful they are if they need convincing, or if they need convincing to do them at home together, so that you can have your studio filled with games and laughter and light and fun like you want it to be. Alright, so in our book club, we are talking about the book Make It Stick by Peter C. Brown. If you're reading along with us, please let me know in the chat. I would love to hear how you got along with chapters 3 and 4. If you want to catch up with us, that's where we're up to now. Chapters 3 and 4 we just completed. We're going to be doing 5 and 6 for next week. Super simple, just 2 per week. So this week, chapters 3 and 4, really I thought they could have been one chapter in terms of what they were covering. I thought they overlapped a lot, and so I can't really separate them out in any distinctive way. I mean, I could, but I didn't think it was beneficial to do so. So my thoughts really revolved around this idea of blocked practice versus spaced or interleaved practice. And I'd love to hear what you thought and what stood out for you. Maybe you took something different, but this was my second time reading through it, and that's really what I took from it on this second reading. So for those of you who aren't aware, blocked practice is literally practicing the same thing over and over and over until you get it. I'll start with space. Spaced practice is where you leave spaces between it. So you do a little bit of it, then you have a bit of your day, or you go away and practice something else or whatever. And then you do a little bit later and a little bit later. So you're breaking up that block. And then interleaved is practicing a little bit of this thing, then a little bit of that thing, and going back and forth or cycling through 3 items or 4 items so that you're going around like that. So it's very similar to blocked. And really the two strategies achieve similar, maybe not in scientific terms, but they achieve similar things in terms of what we're trying to instill in our studios. Linda, the name of the book is Make It Stick. The Science of Successful Learning is the subtitle, and the author is Peter C. Brown. Hope that helps. Angie, I'm so glad to hear you made it almost all the way through chapter 4. You're keeping up with us. Nice. Really good. Okay. And hopefully you can do 5 and 6 this week as well. I'd love to hear what you thought of it. So for me, it was all about blocked and interleaved practice. Blocked versus interleaved and spaced practice. And 2 thoughts really came up for me. And again, this was my second time reading through it, and I am familiar with these concepts already. So if they're brand new to you, you will have taken way more from this and much more specific different things. But for me, I came up with 2 thoughts. And they were, first of all, blocked practice. The thing that started occurring to me when he talked about this was, this is what I did as a teenager. I did spaced practice. I did spaced practice because I would practice a few minutes here, a few minutes there. I mean, I'd say especially my late teen years, like ages 15, 16, 17, those kind of years. I was doing this. This is how I practiced. A few minutes here, and then I'd go brush my teeth, and then I'd do a few minutes, and then I'd go and study history, and then I'd do a few minutes. And this was particularly true of, say, my last 2 years of school, when we're really in Ireland getting ready for what we call the Leaving Cert, which is a pretty intense final exam. It's kind of evolving now, thank goodness, but it's pretty much, you spend 2 years preparing for this 1 2-week session of exams that is going to decide what college you can get into. So it's pretty crazy. But while I was studying so hard and also trying to sit piano exams through that, this is how it fit in for me. It would be my break from my study. Does that sound like the book to anyone? It sounds a lot like this spaced practice or interleaved practice in terms of different subjects. So I often think about interleaved practice within practice, but it also could be breaking up other things. And I'm going to think of that in my head as spaced practice when it's broken up by completely separate activities, other schoolwork or football or anything else, versus interleaved when you're going back and forth between piano assignments. So I was really doing spaced practice that whole time, and it worked well for me, and it's still my favorite way to practice. Sit down for a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes or 5 minutes when I was a teenager at a time, and do what I can, and then go away. And that kept it super interesting, super engaging, super challenging. And as many of you will know, I'm aware that I like challenges more than other people. I stick with things more than most people, naturally. And so as a teenager, that was still true. Like, I wasn't any kind of prodigy at anything ever. I'm not trying to imply that. But I was someone who would just keep at things and didn't mind difficulty. So as I thought about this and thought about how can I bring that into my students' practice, more spaced practice, and encouraging them to practice in this way, especially my overscheduled students, I came up against a bit of a roadblock. Because for me, what I'm worried about is if I encourage that, it feels like less of a commitment. And so let's say we encourage families to do 5 minutes at a time instead of doing one 15-minute segment. Let's just say that's the time frames and a number of them we're talking about. So 3 sessions of 5 minutes versus 15 minutes in one go. My concern is that each one of those 5 minutes feels like less of a big deal. And that can be a really good thing for sure. But the concern is each time you're about to do that 5 minutes, it's very easy to just fob it off. Do you think I'm founded or unfounded in this? I'd love to hear what you think, but I'd be worried that each of one of those 5 minutes, you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh yeah, but I'm late today, so I'll do my 5 minutes later. This one, I'll have to skip this one, or I'll have to skip the next one. And that low level of commitment could be really make things feel easier, but it could make it also easier to just forget it. What do you think? I don't know. That's one thing I'm chewing on from the book, and I don't have the answers here. This is just me bringing up the questions that came out for me. Number 2 was interleaved practice, which is something I've been doing more and more actually in my students' lessons, really focusing on bouncing around between things and looping back on things. Something I've always tried to do for the past several years, but I'm doing it actually a lot more this year. I've really found a rhythm with it. Now, while I think that's great and it's going well for me this year, the thing I want to keep an eye on is this does feel harder for students. And he came back to that again and again. This is learning that is more effective, but feels less effective. So there's definitely a balance to be struck here between making sure students are motivated enough to still practice at home because things don't feel too overwhelming and hard, which we could cause them to feel with too much interleaving, versus actually making the lesson and the practice sessions effective. So interleaving isn't something I do really with beginners, or encourage them to do at home, I should say. With beginners, with older students I will, but there is a very careful teeter-totter here where we're dealing with, do we make practice effective or do we make it seem easy? Because we do need it to, on some level, seem easy enough that someone is happy to go into it. So what do you think? Karen says, I agree on putting it off, especially for kids. Yeah, but there's a gradient there, isn't there? Riley's mom. I'm listening to the book, but I have a hard time holding on to specific points. More of a visual learner, but enjoying it enough that I will be purchasing the hard copy. Yeah, it's an interesting thing about audiobooks. I said this at the start, that of us working on this book, I actually read it in physical ebook copy, I should say. I read it on my Kindle, and then this time I opted for the audiobook. And I'm someone who can barely remember which one they did. Like, the experiences are so similar for me, I think. And I only realized this in more recent years that, like, if I think back on a book, I could tell you I listened to the audiobook and I can hear this imaginary narrator's voice in my head that I listened to. And then I go looking for it. I'm like, where is it? Where is it? And it turns out I didn't listen to it. I read it. So I think I'm a bit bizarre on that front, but I totally get what you're saying. Might be one to take notes during, but then the benefit of audiobooks is that we can do other stuff, isn't it? Angie, page 57. It's not what you know, but how you practice what you know that determines how well learning serves you later. Switch before each practice is complete. Yeah, so that's one of those things that we can say it and we can do it in our practice, but there's a danger of us giving our students advice that we believe is so effective because it works for us. And the reason it works for us is we're already at expert level and it is not appropriate beginner advice. And that sounds like an easy switch to make, but there's little nuances in there that I've found myself going, wait, hang on. Is this something I've realized would have been better if I did it from the beginning? Or is it something that is better now because I went through that, even though that was less effective? I wasn't ready for that strategy at that time. So yeah, really interesting. Another quote from Angie: new learning is not fully formed and easily altered. Yes. Yeah, but he almost made the opposite point, Angie, which is we get so concerned about embedding mistakes, or at least I do. And he's almost saying, no, that's not, we are able to unlearn things. Yes, we can embed mistakes over time for sure, but maybe we're too quick to be concerned about, doing this thing wrong in some way that we're going to have to go back over later. I'm not sure. Anyway, there's lots to think about. We're reading chapters 5 and 6 this week. I'm really looking forward to that myself. It's become my little Monday ritual, actually, to either listen or re-listen on Monday and then take some notes and then come on the show. So that's really fun for me. I hope you're enjoying the book as well. I hope you enjoyed our chat today about talking to parents about games. And if you're a member of Vibrant Music Teaching, I hope that you'll join me in about 30 minutes for our live masterclass with Christopher Oyle, all about teaching composing. I'll see you there.